What if the moment you wake up is the exact moment you lose all reason to get out of bed? It sounds impossible. Isn't awakening supposed to flood you with clarity, peace, and purpose? Isn't the spiritual path meant to energize you, not erase you? But Carl Jung warned of a truth that most people discover far too late. Spiritual awakening does not always come with light. Sometimes it comes with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that swallows everything you once thought mattered. You don't hear this in the books. No one tells you that after the glow of awakening fades, what remains is often a hollow ache. The goals that once drove you now seem trivial. The routines you once clung to feel mechanical. Even the things that used to light your soul, success, relationships, achievements, suddenly appear as costumes in a play you no longer believe in. It's not depression, it's disillusionment. It's the soul pulling its energy back from illusions that no longer nourish it. Carl Jung saw this again and again in his patients. People who had achieved great worldly success would sit across from him, eyes empty, asking the same question: why don't I care anymore? And behind that question was a deeper cry. Not for more motivation, but for something real. Something that doesn't vanish when the applause ends. This moment, the collapse of drive, the sudden absence of direction, is not the end. It's the invitation. Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the death of the persona, and it hurts, not because you are broken, but because you are shedding a skin that no longer fits your soul. Awakening doesn't add more to your life. It subtracts. It strips, it peels back layers until what's left is so raw, so honest, it terrifies the ego. Motivation dies because the story that once fueled it no longer makes sense. You wake up one morning and realize you've been running toward goals that were never truly yours. You inherited them. You were programmed into them. And now your spirit refuses to play along. But here lies the paradox. The emptiness that follows awakening is not the absence of meaning. It is the space where real meaning can finally emerge. It is the stillness before the music begins again, not the old tune of people-pleasing or achievement, but the quiet rhythm of your own truth. So if your motivation has vanished, if your to-do list makes you nauseous, and your passion feels like a stranger, don't panic. Don't rush to fix it. Sit in the silence. Listen to what your soul is trying to say. Because in that void, in that terrifying pause, a new fire is waiting to be born. And it will not burn you out. It will awaken you fully. Have you ever reached a point in your life where even hope feels heavy? You've outgrown who you used to be, but have no idea who you're becoming. Your job no longer fulfills you, your relationships feel like echoes, and even the things that once gave you comfort now seem strangely foreign. You wake up, not depressed exactly, but hollow, like someone pressed pause on your life and forgot to hit play again. This is not laziness, it's not failure. It's the soul entering what Carl Jung called nigredo, the blackening, the sacred descent, the death of the old self before anything new can be born. Jung borrowed this term from alchemy, where nigredo is the first stage in the process of turning base metal into gold. It is the decay, the breakdown, the dissolving of what is false. Psychologically, it is the moment when the ego's illusions begin to collapse under the weight of deeper truth. And while it may look like apathy on the surface, underneath it is a quiet eruption. Something inside is breaking, not to destroy you, but to awaken you. This experience often comes after a great spiritual or emotional realization. For example, a mother who devoted her life to caring for others suddenly feels invisible once her children grow up. She once found identity in nurturing, but now she stares at herself in the mirror, asking, "Who am I without them?" Or consider a man who built his identity on achievement and financial success, only to realize one day that none of it makes him feel alive. He doesn't know what's next. All he knows is that he cannot keep pretending. These are not moments of weakness. They are thresholds, initiations. You see, when your soul begins to awaken, it does not hand you a new plan. It strips away the old one. It takes the scaffolding of your identity, your roles, your routines, your masks, and leaves you in limbo. You are too awake to return to the old life, yet not clear enough to walk into the new one. This in-between state can last weeks, months, or even years, and it feels terrifying. You may ask, am I broken? Why can't I feel excited about anything anymore? Is this really what awakening looks like? Yes, Jung said. This is exactly what it looks like. Transformation does not begin with inspiration. It begins with disintegration. The personality you spent your whole life constructing begins to dissolve because it was built on borrowed dreams, inherited fears, and unconscious conditioning. The darkness you now face is not punishment. It is a portal. And the pain you feel is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something deeper is trying to be born. So if you are in that space right now, floating between who you were and who you might become, don't rush to escape it. Stay, feel, witness. This stage is not the end of your story. It is the womb. And in that darkness, the most sacred kind of healing begins. The kind that doesn't just fix the surface, but rewrites your soul. Have you ever felt this sacred emptiness? Are you in it now? And if so, what part of you is trying to be born? Let us know in the comments. Your story may be the mirror someone else is desperately searching for. Have you ever woken up and felt like the world had somehow flattened overnight? Colors duller, purpose vanished, joy unreachable? Not because something bad happened, but because nothing felt real anymore. This disquieting emptiness isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in silence, slipping into the most ordinary moments. A once ambitious mother, seated at the dinner table, stares at a half-eaten meal and wonders why she no longer cares about anything, not the job, not the relationships, not even her children's laughter. She isn't lazy. She isn't ungrateful. She's simply disappeared inside herself. This kind of psychic collapse often frightens us because it looks like depression, failure, or dysfunction. Yet Carl Jung warned that these moments are not pathological, they are symbolic. He believed that when life loses its flavor, it is often the soul withdrawing its energy from a false self, no longer willing to uphold the illusion. We see this in the story of Maria, who entered deep meditation to find peace, but emerged detached from her entire identity. Her roles, ambitions, and even love for life dissolved. She wasn't broken, she was being stripped. Likewise, Thomas, once a titan in the business world, couldn't explain why closing million-dollar deals suddenly made him nauseous. What once validated his worth now felt like chains. Jung called this stage enantiodromia, a turning of tides, when the psyche, exhausted by years of repression or self-betrayal, demands balance. It feels like everything is crumbling, but it is not destruction. It is reordering. When your desire to engage with the world dies, it may be that what you built was never truly you. The job you loved may have been a mask. The relationship you fought for might have been rooted in fear. The goals you once chased may have been inherited dreams, not soul dreams. So what happens when nothing matters anymore? Do we medicate it away? Escape into distractions, or dare to listen to what the silence is saying? Because beneath the stillness, a sacred process is unfolding. You are no longer available for inauthenticity. You are no longer willing to sacrifice your essence for approval. You are in the dark womb of the psyche's rebirth. It is terrifying because it feels like dying. And in a way, it is. The death of the ego, the death of the performance. But like the mythic phoenix, you are being asked to burn in order to rise. Many people don't talk about this stage because it doesn't look heroic. It looks like fatigue, apathy, and confusion. But what if these are not signs of failure, but invitations to stop clinging? Jung wrote that the soul often hides its voice beneath symptoms. So, what is your fatigue trying to say? What is your numbness protecting you from feeling? When everything loses meaning, you are not losing yourself. You are losing what you are not, and that is a sacred transition. Have you ever felt this kind of inner collapse? What helped you? Endure it? Or are you still inside the fire, waiting to understand what it all means? Why is it that after years of chasing success, love, or even spiritual growth, you can suddenly wake up one day and feel absolutely nothing toward it all? The promotion you once fought for feels meaningless. The marriage you once cherished now feels like a script you no longer remember auditioning for. The goals that used to excite you fall flat, like echoes bouncing off walls that no longer respond. This moment arrives quietly, yet it shakes your inner world like an earthquake, soft on the outside, shattering on the inside. This inner hollowness is not laziness or failure. It is often the result of an invisible rupture, a moment where the soul, having endured years of pretending, finally pulls back its energy from the illusion. Carl Jung saw this collapse as an inevitable consequence of awakening. Not the spiritual kind that sparkles with joy and enlightenment, but the sobering kind that strips away everything artificial. Jung believed that our original goals are often born from the persona, the mask we wear to survive the social world. These goals are usually laced with fear, performance, and the hunger for validation. Think of the woman who built an entire life around being the perfect daughter, only to find herself in her 40s feeling suffocated by obligations that no longer resonate. Or the man who spent decades climbing the corporate ladder, only to realize at the top that he had been running from childhood shame, not toward purpose. When the persona shatters, what is left behind is not clarity. It is a vast unknown, the gap between who we were and who we really are. This explains the peculiar grief that follows awakening. You mourn a self that was never truly you, but one you lived as if it were. You mourn goals that once gave you direction, now exposed as distractions. And perhaps most confusing of all, you mourn your own ambition. That fire which once made you feel alive suddenly dies, and with it, your sense of identity. Jung understood this crisis intimately. He called it the death of the false self, and while it feels like everything is falling apart, it is actually the beginning of reintegration. The psyche can no longer push forward under the weight of borrowed dreams. Something deeper is calling, but before you can hear it, there is silence. In this silence, you may feel paralyzed. What do you do when the old motivations are gone, but new ones have not yet arrived? This is the moment many mistake for depression, for laziness, or even failure. But what if this emptiness is sacred? What if your lack of motivation is not a weakness, but a signal that your soul refuses to chase what no longer aligns? So many adults in midlife silently struggle with this. The woman who can no longer force herself to hustle, even though she used to thrive on productivity. The man who stops going to networking events, not because he's antisocial, but because he's begun to see through the performance. The spiritual seeker who once devoured books and retreats now sits in stillness, wondering if any of it was ever real. This void is not your enemy. It is a doorway. You are standing in the gap between the constructed life and the authentic life, between what you were told to want and what your soul actually longs for. But here lies the challenge. The world rewards consistency, not transformation. People will ask why you've changed, why you're not as driven or enthusiastic as before. They will project fear onto your stillness, and if you're not grounded, you might mistake your pause for regression. But Carl Jung would remind you, this is not regression. This is the dismantling of what was never truly you. The gift hidden in this disorientation is that you are now free to rebuild from truth, not fear, from alignment, not performance, from soul, not persona. Have you ever reached a moment when everything you used to care about suddenly stopped making sense? What changed in you? And what new truth is trying to emerge in that space? If everything familiar has fallen away, how do you begin again without losing yourself in fear or forcing yourself into the old shape? When you've outgrown your past, but the future hasn't yet spoken, how do you find direction without clinging to distractions? Most people try to fill the void as quickly as possible. They jump into new careers, relationships, or spiritual programs, hoping to restore the lost fire. But Carl Jung saw this reactive tendency as a bypass. He believed that transformation cannot be rushed. The ego, stripped of its old narratives, must first dissolve before anything authentic can emerge. That is why Jung developed a symbolic healing path forward, a three-stage process that invites rebirth not from effort, but from inner surrender and soulful alignment. The first stage is conscious dissolution, and it is perhaps the most painful. Here, you are asked to grieve, not only what you've lost, but who you were while chasing it. You begin to feel the weight of dreams that weren't truly yours. You notice the fatigue beneath your people-pleasing, the resentment hidden in your accomplishments, and the grief you buried beneath your smile. Jung believed this stage was crucial. Without mourning the false life, the new life cannot be born. Think of Lena, a former nurse who spent decades caring for others, but realized in her early 50s that her entire identity was built around self-neglect. When she stopped, the silence was unbearable. But slowly, with guidance and inner work, she began to grieve not just her career, but the little girl who had learned that being needed was the only way to be loved. That grief was sacred. It became the soil in which something real could grow. The second stage is active imagination. Jung invited people to turn inward and speak directly with the unconscious. Through journaling, meditation, drawing, or dream analysis, the soul begins to speak in symbols. This stage is not about fixing the problem. It's about listening deeply. It is here that new desires begin to take shape, not from the mind, but from the psyche itself. Take David, a retired lawyer who spent years in burnout after awakening. One night, he had a dream of an old oak tree splitting open to reveal a hidden stairwell underground. The image haunted him. Through drawing and dream dialogue, he realized he had buried a love for storytelling that had lived in him since childhood. That image, so irrational yet so alive, guided him into writing a memoir, not for fame, but to reclaim his voice. The unconscious had spoken through symbol. He simply listened. Finally, Jung's third stage is symbolic living, the art of allowing your life to be guided by inner resonance rather than external structure. In this stage, you stop chasing goals just to prove your worth. Instead, you begin to follow synchronicities, subtle feelings, and symbols that speak to the soul. You make space for mystery. Life becomes less about certainty and more about alignment. Elena, a woman in her 60s, described how, after her awakening, she no longer planned her weeks rigidly. Instead, she left open space for what she called Soul invitations. One morning, she felt a sudden urge to visit an old bookstore she hadn't seen in years. There, she met someone who would later become her creative collaborator. This wasn't a coincidence. It was synchronicity, what Jung saw as the universe mirroring our inner truth. Symbolic living does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means returning to a deeper form of guidance. It means asking, what image calls to me? What feeling refuses to be ignored? What is life trying to tell me through this silence? When you begin to live this way, something miraculous happens. The void no longer feels like emptiness. It becomes a fertile space, humming with unseen potential. The energy that once scattered toward performance now returns inward, nourishing the roots of your true self. This is the rebirth Jung spoke of. Not a grand external reinvention, but an internal homecoming. A quiet knowing that you are no longer living from a mask, but from a place of truth. So ask yourself, are you willing to sit in the unknown long enough for a new image to emerge? Are you ready to follow the strange dreams, the quiet impulses, the wild synchronicities that defy logic but speak directly to your soul? Because when you stop forcing and start listening, you may find that life has been whispering your true path all along. What if the energy you were desperately trying to generate was never meant to be forced, but remembered, like a fire that has always lived inside you? What if true motivation doesn't roar, but glows? Many people spend decades chasing energy from the outside, validation, approval, status, deadlines. They push through exhaustion with caffeine, guilt, or sheer willpower. But this kind of energy always fades. It collapses the moment the reward disappears or the applause quiets. Burnout is not a sign of weakness. It is a spiritual signal that the fire you are feeding is not your own. Carl Jung believed there are two kinds of fire. The first comes from the ego. It burns bright, fast, and loud. It is fueled by comparison, fear, and the need to be seen. It devours everything in its path to survive, leaving behind ashes of depletion. But the second fire, the one Jung called soul motivation, burns differently. It is not noisy or dramatic. It is steady, sacred, and self-sustaining. Unlike egoic drive, soul motivation does not arise from proving your worth. It comes from embodying your truth. It is the quiet pull towards something you cannot explain but cannot ignore. It feels like a soft magnetism. You're not chasing anything, yet something in you is moving. Consider the story of Michael, a man who left a high-stakes corporate role after a panic attack nearly ended his life. For months, he did nothing but rest and walk in nature. One day, without planning, he began sculpting small clay figures. He had no training, no plan to sell them, but something about the process made him feel alive again. His hands, once used to type reports, now shaped stories from the silence. Years later, his sculptures would find their way into healing centers across the country. But the purpose wasn't the result, it was the return of breath, meaning, and soul. This is the difference Jung pointed to. When the motivation is authentic, it feels like remembering, not performing. It comes with effort, yes, but never strain. It asks for your attention, not your sacrifice. It flows like water downhill, not like a rock pushed uphill. Soul fire does not demand that you hustle. It invites you to align. Look at Grace, a mother who raised 4 children and always put her dreams on hold. In her 60s, she finally began writing poetry again, something she hadn't touched since college. At first, it felt foolish. Who was she to write at her age? But one morning, a line of verse came to her like a whisper. She wrote it down, then another. Months later, she was reading her poems aloud at a small cafe. Not for fame, not for money, but because the words had returned, and with them, so had she. Jung taught that when you live from the soul, life no longer feels like a performance. You're not waiting for motivation to strike, because the very act of being yourself fuels the movement. You are the flame and the spark. The goal is not separate from the journey. It is the journey. So how? Do you know if your fire is ego or soul? Ask yourself, does it deplete me or nourish me? Does it tighten my chest or open my heart? Do I need to force it, or does it call me gently but persistently? Soul fire will not scream over the noise of the world, but if you sit in stillness long enough, it will speak. It may not give you a perfect plan, but it will offer you a thread that leads not to certainty, but to truth, not to control, but to freedom. This is the fire that never burns out. Because it does not need to be lit by others, it rises from the deep center of your being, where love, intuition, and purpose live like coals under the ash, waiting for breath. So perhaps the real question is not, what should I do with my life? But rather, what quiet inner voice have I been ignoring? What simple joy have I dismissed as unimportant? What if that whisper is the first flicker of a fire that can carry me home? Suppose you have ever felt exhausted from proving yourself, from chasing, from pretending. Pause, breathe, listen. You don't need to ignite the fire. You only need to stop pouring water on it. Let it glow, let it grow, let it guide you. There is a sacred silence that follows awakening, and it is often mistaken for emptiness. But what if the void isn't empty at all? What if the heaviness, the pause, the stillness after your old motivations dissolve is not a sign of failure, but the womb of your rebirth? Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally unsolvable. They must be outgrown. And that is what the void is, not a problem to solve, but a space you must grow into, a sacred pregnancy of the soul. When everything that once drove you loses meaning, ambition, validation, even hope, what remains is not a vacuum, but an invitation. The void is the most misunderstood part of awakening. It appears like death, but it holds life. It feels like despair, but it is fertile with potential. Your old self has collapsed, and the new self has not yet spoken. You are between stories, between lifetimes, between masks. And in this holy in-between, you are asked to do something most people never do. Wait, not with fear, but with reverence. Jung called this the space of transformation. In the darkness of the unknown, you meet the self, not the ego, not the persona, but the soul blueprint that has always whispered from beneath the noise. But you must be still enough to hear it. The void asks for your presence, not your productivity. It teaches you to trust the pace of something deeper than desire. And if you listen, truly listen, you will begin to sense a quiet pull, a creative impulse, a calling not born from fear or fantasy, but from the soul's own knowing. This is not about finding your next goal. It is about discovering the energy behind your existence, a purpose not given by society, but revealed by your silence. Those who endure the void without trying to escape it are the ones who emerge with an authenticity so rare, it magnetizes life itself. They stop chasing meaning and start emanating it. They stop performing and begin radiating. They no longer ask, "What should I do?" but instead, "What wants to come through me now?" So if you are in the space between lost and unsure, do not rush to escape it. Stay, wait, breathe. The seed doesn't fear the soil, it trusts the dark. Your soul is gestating something new. And like every true birth, it comes not with noise, but with stillness, contraction, and finally, emergence. This is not the end of your path. It is the beginning of your most real life. The void is not the absence of meaning. It is the place where meaning is born. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.